according to John. We're doing the book of John. Last week, Deborah was up here. We took a little break from the Gospel of John. She's talking about Pentecost, the Feast of Pentecost. We got a chance to talk about that. In case you haven't noticed, the tablecloth has changed from red for Pentecost to green for ordinary time. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, ask Greg. He'll tell you all about it. Okay? Right? There's a reason for it, but just to let you know. Where we're at today is John chapter 5, verses 19 through 47. I've entitled this, Like Father, Like Son. I love this picture. Look at this. Is that a great picture? How many of you did stuff like that with your dad? Made shoes? No, some kind of hobby or something like that. How many of you did some kind of hobby or something like that with your dad? Isn't it great when you can pass on stuff like that and spend some time with your dad? You know, unfortunately, my dad hated all the stuff. My dad, I hated all the stuff that he did. He's a, fisher, hunter kind of guy, and I'm like a brunch kind of guy, just... That's why I wouldn't go fishing with him, right? Because it's like at 4 he wants to get up at 4 in the morning and go fish. Who likes fishing? Anybody like fishing? And you got to get up at like 4 in the morning and go sit out there and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like going, do they have brunch at 4? I don't think so. So anyway, like father, like son. This is a long passage. In fact, this is one of the longest uninterrupted monologues that Jesus has in the Gospel of John. And so I've divided it up because I didn't want you falling asleep. So I'm going to read part of it, and I'm going to have you guys read part of it. Figure out how that works. I'm going to read the first slide, and you guys read the second slide. You got that? Okay, I don't want you guys falling asleep during this, so here we go. I'll read the first one. Jesus said to them, "Very truly I tell you, the Son can do nothing on his own, but only what he sees the Father doing. For whatever the Father does, the Son does likewise. The Father loves the Son and shows him all that he himself is doing, and he will show him greater works than these, so that you will be astonished." Very truly I tell you, anyone who hears my word and believes him who sent me has eternal life and does not come under judgment, but has passed from death to life. Very truly I tell you, the hour is coming and is now here when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. For just as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son also to have life in himself. I can do nothing on my own. As I hear, I judge. And my judgment is just, because I seek to do not my own will, but the will of him who sent me. If I testify about myself, my testimony is not true. There's another who testifies on my behalf, and I know that his testimony to me is true. You sent messengers to John, and he testified to the truth. Not that I accept such human testimony, but I say these things so that you might be saved. You search the Scriptures because you think that in them you have eternal life, and it is they that testify on my behalf. Yet you refuse to come to me to have life. I do not accept glory from human beings, but I know that you do not have the love of God in you. I have come in my Father's name, and you do not accept me. If another comes in his own name, you will accept him. How can you believe when you accept glory from one another and do not seek the glory that comes from the one who alone is God? Excellent. Very truly I say to you. Sometimes you'll see some translations that says amen, amen. In this case, it means very truly. So what Jesus is saying is, I'm about to lay some really heavy-duty stuff on you. Let me tell you what the truth really is. And now, this was a long passage, and there's a lot to it. Let me kind of break it down and simplify it a little bit for you, kind of show you kind of a little bit of an outline here for you. Jesus is saying, I am the Father's Son. I am the Father's Son. How do you know I'm the Father's Son? Well, because we do similar things. We're alike, right? Fathers and sons oftentimes tend to turn out a little, pretty much the same. How many of you have heard your father's voice come out of your mouth? How many of you have heard your mother's voice come out of your mouth? And that's a scary thing. You're like, how did that happen? Right? You turn and you say something, you're like, oh. Where's my dad hiding? He's the one who says that kind of stuff. But I am my Father's Son because we're alike. I do what he does. I do what he does. I give life like he gives life. I judge like he judges. And since I judge, and this is the second part of that particular passage, since I judge, here's my judgment on you guys. As he turns to the religious leader and says, since the Father has given me the right to judge, here's my judgment. So that's kind of the basic outline. You got that? All right. So I am my Father's Son. This is what he has to say about himself. That he's not just a mirror reflection. It's not like, God moves his right hand, so Jesus moves his. It's not just some mirror reflection. That he's a whole separate person, isn't he? He's not just some mirrored reflection of who God is. He's not a servant. Although Christ many times says that he can only do the will of the Father, it's not because he's a servant and he has no will of his own. It's because he chooses to be obedient to his Father. It's like us and our parents. Either we choose to be obedient to them or we don't. Normally, when we choose to be obedient to them, it's either out of fear or out of love, one or the other, right? And so he chooses to be obedient. He's not just a servant. In fact, if you look at how it's laid out, it's like a father teaching a son his craft. It's almost like a father and son apprenticeship thing going on. That here I've shown him my work. I show him what I'm doing. I've shown him he was there when I created the world. He helped me create the world. He's helped me recreate the world. I am showing him everything that I do and everything that I am, and he is now living that out in his life. It's a father-son relationship, more like an apprenticeship. And that's why I showed that picture at the very beginning. That's what Jesus is trying to say. I'm just like my Father. I've learned everything from him because he has shown me how to do it. And now I'm doing it here in front of you. It's a unity of purpose and will. This is what my Father wants for the world. And this is what I'm going to do as well. I'm carrying out my Father's work here in this realm, the physical realm where we're at. I'm doing it just like he would want me to do it. Jesus says, I give life. I give life. Rabbi Yochanan said that there are 3 keys to the Holy One, blessed be he retained in his own hands and has not entrusted to the hand of any messenger. Namely, the key of rain, the key of childbirth, and the key of the revival of the dead. And you can find this as an ancient writing. You can find it in the commentaries on the scriptures. It precedes Jesus himself. But the idea was there are 3 things that only God does. And according to the way that they interpret this, that these 3 keys mentioned here by the sages are all tied to the source of existence. That through them, God touches our world at 3 central stations in life. Our inception, that's the key of childbirth. Okay, our being, that's the key of rain, because it's rain that sustains everything on this planet that then sustains us. Okay, so our being, and of course, resurrection, the revival of the dead. There's only 3 things that God holds only to himself. And Jesus is saying, and I do these things. As he has life and he gives life, I give life. So I'm like my Father in this way. And by saying this, he is equating himself with God, that I am equal with God. If you remember when I talked about missing the point that was too weeks ago, the passage right before this, where Jesus heals the man by the pool of Bethsaida, and he picks up his mat and carries it off, and the Pharisees stop him and say, why are you carrying your mat on the Sabbath? You're not allowed to do that. It's like, well, apparently they missed the point. Here's a guy who's been laying there for 38 years, and he's up and walking, and they're all worried about the mat. And Jesus says, hey, this is what my Father does. My Father is still working. Sabbath is over, right? 6 days he created and took a Sabbath. Now the Sabbath is over. Now we're all working again. And I'm doing the works of my Father. And it inflamed them because he was making himself equal to God. And this is now following that story. He says, let me give you an even better explanation. I give life. I've returned the life to this man. I've healed him so that he's no longer a paralytic. Jesus says, I also judge. Okay? God is the judge. Now, oftentimes we have a hard time with this word judge, because when we think of judge, we usually think in very negative ways, don't we? Because we are, don't be so judgmental, don't judge me. Usually we think about harsh criticism or somebody putting us down or something like that, or putting burdens on us that they shouldn't put on us. That's normally how we think about judge. But that's not the way they thought about the term judge in Jesus' time. In Jesus' time, judge actually had a very positive connotation, because it was a judge who would set things correct. It was a judge who would make sure that righteousness was fulfilled. It was the judge who made sure that things were fair and equitable. So it wasn't about, don't be judgmental. Judges are good things. In the Old Testament, there's a book called Judges. And these are the people who rescued Israel time and again. So judges were looked at as almost heroes, as people who would come and who would rescue. Oftentimes in the Psalms, you'll hear the psalmist cry out, judge me, because to be judged, especially to be judged by God, was to be proven that you were in the right, to be proven that what you were doing was not wrong. So judge is not necessarily a negative term. And so what Jesus is saying is that God is judge, and J.I. Packer, in his book, Knowing God, instructs his readers on the of God as judge. Let me give you some of these here. The judge is a person with authority in the Bible world. The king was always the supreme judge because he was the supreme ruling authority. It's on that basis, according to the Bible, that God is judge of this world, because he's the king of the world, right? As our maker, he owns us, and as our owner, he has the right to dispose of us. He has, therefore, a right to make laws for us and to reward us according to whether or not we keep them. So as our maker and our owner, he has rights over us. The judge is a person identified with what is good and right. The modern idea that a judge should be cold and dispassionate has no place in the Bible. The biblical judge is expected to love justice and fair play, and to loathe all ill treatment of one person by another. The judge is a person of wisdom to discern truth. In the biblical setting, the judge's first task is to ascertain the facts in the case that is before him. There's no jury. It's his responsibility and his alone to question and cross-examine and detect lies and pierce through the evasions and establish how matters really stand. When the Bible pictures God judging, it emphasizes his omniscience and his wisdom as the searcher of hearts and the finder of facts. Nothing can escape him. We may fool men, but we cannot fool God. He knows us and judges us as we really are. And what Jesus is saying is, just like God is judge, he has now given that authority to me. I am now the judge. And so by taking on this mantle of judgeship, he's taking on the mantle of the divine, that he is omniscient, that he has the wisdom, that he owns us, and he is our king, and he has the right to make judgments over us. Talk about inflaming an audience. I'm sure that when the religious leaders heard this, they were even more upset. God gives the task of being a judge to Jesus. And he has given him authority to judge because he is the Son of Man. Now, that's a unique term, Son of Man. It shows up in several places throughout the Bible. In fact, in the book of Ezekiel, it's the favorite kind of term that is used to when God is speaking to Ezekiel. He says, Son of man, tell them this. Son of man, tell them that. Son of man, tell them something else. And in that sense, it simply means human being. Human, tell them this. But there is a special place in the book of Daniel where the Son of Man takes on a different significance. And this is what Jesus is referring to here. That because I am the Son of Man, and he takes on this Daniel title. Let's take a look and see if it's there. Son of Man in the book of Daniel. Let's take a look at that one. In the book of Daniel, Daniel has a vision. Daniel being one of the prophets, he has a vision, and this is the vision that he has. In my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power over all peoples, nations, and men of every language worship him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. So this title, Son of Man, is about God dwelling with us, coming, and that all glory and all power and all honor, and that he's going to establish his kingdom. This was the divine that was going to be walking amongst us. And Jesus appropriates this title. Talk about inflaming your audience. It's like, are you saying you're God? I'm saying that's who I am. Some people claim that Jesus, never said that he was God. Well, they're not reading very closely, if you ask me. But in Daniel, Son of Man, and Jesus says, I have the authority to judge because I am the Son of Man. This is my kingdom. And as the king, I own you. I have the right to judge you. God has given it to me. So, since he gives life, and since he also has the right to judge, he says, here is my judgment over you because of what you have said. He said, first off, why don't we consider the testimony that has been presented to you? You've had testimony presented to you. Let's take a look at it. First off, John the Baptist, he testified about me. In fact, we saw earlier in the book of John that they went out and they asked him, John, are you the Messiah? No, I'm not the Messiah. Are you the prophet? No, I'm not the prophet. Who are you? And he tells them who he is. And then he says, but here's the person I'm testifying about. He's the one. I'm not even worthy to tie his sandals, but he's the one I've come to testify about. And they're like, okay. But yeah, I got John. We got John. That's good. But that's a lesser testimony. And Jesus says, let's take a look at an even better testimony. How about my works? That whole thing about I turned water into wine? Messianic symbology there. Did you miss that? Oh, how about the fact that I just gave life back to this paralytic? Apparently you missed the point on that I'm going around and I'm healing people. Are you not picking up on this? Because this is what the Father does. As creation has fallen, he is recreating and bringing life back. And that's what I'm doing. I am my Father's son because I am doing what he does. He recreates and he brings life, and I'm doing that right here in your midst, and you missed it. That's an even greater testimony. John was good, but this is even better. Oh, wait a minute, how about this one? The Father testifies to me. The Father testifies about me. That's the greatest testimony that you have. That when God himself says, that's him, you should be paying attention. Jesus tells me, you're not even paying attention. You haven't seen his form. You haven't heard his voice like I have. But he's talked to you. In Scripture, he has repeatedly spoken of me. And you missed it. And what is your response to all this testimony about me? Well, you don't believe the one sent. Here I am. Everybody has testified. It's me. And you're like, yeah, but you made him carry his mat on Sunday. That can't be right. I'm not matching up to who you think I should be, and so you're rejecting me. You've read all about me. You've discussed me. You've written about me. You've talked about me. And you have no idea who I am because you really don't know who God is. And when God shows up in your midst, you have no clue. You refuse to come to me for life. I give life, and you're not coming to me, and you should be, because you're not going to find it someplace else. How many of us have been that place? We've looked every other place, and we know there's only one place we can go to receive life. He says, you do not have the love of God in your hearts. And this was probably the greatest indictment against them, that you do not have the love of God in your hearts. Like I said in the Missing the Point, here's this paralytic. He's been laying there for 38 years. He is suddenly healed, and they try to bust him for carrying his mat. Where is the love of God in that? Where's the excitement of, praise God, you've been healed? No, instead they just want to get him into trouble. You're breaking a minor rule that we made up. By the way, you can't find that rule in the Bible, just let you know. And you seek praise from the wrong sources. How many of us are guilty of this? Seeking praise from the wrong sources. You know, the religious leaders, the Pharisees and the scribes and the Herodians and all those folks, they love to be praised by men. They love to praise each other. They love their titles, and they love to stand in the places of honor. And they like people to look at them and say, oh, you're such a great, righteous guy. You're so good, you're so holy, you're so wonderful. Aren't you terrific? And they would accept all this praise. But what does it mean coming from other human beings? It really doesn't matter unless God says that about you, doesn't it? What is the better praise? A whole bunch of people saying, what a great guy you are? Or God looking at you and saying, there you are, my good and faithful servant. Or even better than that, there you are, my beloved son. Because we are no longer just servants, are we? We are sons and daughters of the King. What greater praise can there be than that? That's what we should be seeking. Then he turns to him and says, oh, well, you say you believe in Moses. You spend all your time studying Moses. And when they say Moses, they're talking about the first 5 books of the Bible. They're talking about the Pentateuch, right? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. They're talking about that. They're saying you believe in Moses and all that he has said, but you don't really believe in Moses because Moses testifies about me. Moses points to me. Moses told you I'm coming. And here I am, and you don't believe it. And so since you don't believe it, Moses stands as your accuser. The very things that you have been reading, the very things you have been studying, you don't believe them, and so they've come and they now accuse you. You don't believe in me. So, here we have this long speech. Jesus says, I'm just like my Father. I give life, I judge, and here's my judgment that I'm passing on you. But how do we apply that to us today? What does that mean to us today? Well, here's a couple of things. Let's take the Old Testament and the New Testament and kind of put them into perspective. When we talk about the Old Testament, we're talking about, again, the books, Genesis to Malachi. What is the Old Testament really? Well, it kind of depends who you ask. So I'm going to give you my opinion. Okay? You don't have to believe this, but I'll tell you my opinion. Okay? I believe that the Old Testament is a collection of stories and poems and songs and historical narratives. There's some actual history in there. There's some historical narratives. There's a lot of stories that were told to make certain points, but I don't think you should take them literally. There's poems in there about God. There's songs about God. There's a lot of stuff in there. And what are they all for? Well, they're trying to tell us about God. They're trying to explain who God is and his relationship to humankind. I believe that these are divinely inspired stories. I believe they're divinely inspired poems and songs and history. I think they're divinely inspired. That's a whole bunch of people literally having a discussion in their writings, saying, we think God's like this. Over here said, no, we think God is like this. Well, we think God is like this. Well, we think God is like this. Because I can guarantee you, you can take anything from the Old Testament, and whatever point you find about God, you'll probably find a counterpoint as they continue to discuss it back and forth about who do we think God is. And all woven through there, God is saying, this is who I am, this is who I am, this is who I am. It's divinely inspired dialogue and discussion. And I think that's terrific. I like the fact that it's divinely inspired dialogue and discussion because I get to join in. I get to join into that discussion and to talk to other people and to listen to other people and to learn and to teach and to do all of this. You know what I think is the wrong approach to the Old Testament? I think it's like God said it, that's it. Because then where's the discussion? Where's the involvement with you? It's just like, believe it, do it, that's it. I guess I'm just not hardwired that way. You look at me and you tell me, that's it. I'm probably like, well, what about this? I used to think I was really bad about it, but then I met Stanton. Okay? If I can come up with 2 viewpoints on something, like going, well, what about this view? Stanton can come up with 22 viewpoints on something. Okay, those of you who know him, right, know this for a fact. If you want to see 22 viewpoints on something, just ask Stanton. He's got, right? And he'll own up to it. You confess to it, don't you, Stanton? It's true. Okay, it's not like I'm telling, making up stories. But the fact that we have this beautiful, divinely inspired dialogue and discussion means that we can also be inspired and join this discussion and discuss who God is. So what is the New Testament then? Well, the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that's the 4 Gospels. The 4 Gospels is God revealed in Jesus. He says, you've been discussing me for a long time, and I have sent prophets, and I have inspired people to tell you who I am, and I've shown you kind of a picture. And if you put it all together, I kind of think of the Old Testament like a mosaic. You guys know what a mosaic is? With all those little colored tiles, and you put them together. And if you're really close up, you don't see them, but when you stand back, you see the picture. I think the Old Testament's sort of like that. It's this beautiful mosaic of all these pieces that are being fit together, and you kind of get a picture of what's going on. And he says, you guys have been figuring out this picture of who I am. Well, here I am. This is who I am. And if you had really studied the scriptures, you'd know who I was when I showed up. That's what Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are about. It's God revealed in Jesus. And then, of course, you have Acts through Revelation. What's that all about? Well, that's how to live in the kingdom, based on our new understanding of who God is. It's like, here I am, here's who I am. I'm just like my Father. If you want to understand who God is, just look at me. Now, this is how you act. Based upon your new understanding, this is how you live your life. And then you can look at the rest of church history as, and we're still trying to figure it out. With some divinely inspired moments and probably some not so divinely inspired moments. But that's still the thing, isn't it? That we're still in the middle of this beautiful, inspired, divinely inspired dialogue and discussion about what Christianity is and what does it really mean to follow Jesus. And as we keep saying around here, right, we are Christ-centered and biblically based. That's all about Jesus, and that we are trying to transform ourselves into the image of Jesus. That's our interpretation. There are others out there. So, if God is revealed to us, then our goal is to do what? To conform to that revelation, to become like it. Just like the Father taught the Son, just like the Father trained up the Son, just like the Son does what his Father does. So we are to be trained as we follow Christ. We literally enter into an apprenticeship with Christ as he trains us up. On Friday nights, we were going through the book, Imitation of Christ. It was an early training manual for here's how you act more Christ-like. Did they get it 100% correct? No. There's some stuff in there you can look at and go, I think they're a little crazy on that part. Okay? But there's a lot of good stuff in there for us to look at and say, hey, we want to become more Christ-like. How do you know when you're Christ-like? You'll be doing the things that he does. That's how you know. If God is indeed love, then what is our goal? It's to love God and love one another. If God is love, and when Jesus walked this earth, he showed love to everyone, then what is our goal? To show love to everyone. That one we have a hard time with, don't we? Showing love to everyone. Probably a couple of years ago, I was doing a sermon up here, and I said, by definition, Christians, if you are a Christian, you have no enemies. They may call themselves an enemy, but as a Christian, what do you call them? Brother, sister. They may declare themselves your enemy, but you as a Christian declare them as what? Friend. Because we are to even love those who declare themselves our enemies, aren't we? There's a tough one. There's a tough one to live out right there. That we have no enemies. We have only those who have not yet entered the kingdom. And it's our job to do what? To love them unconditionally until they do enter the kingdom. God is life. God is life. So what should our goal be? How about live it? He has given us life. Jesus came, and what did he say? I have come that you might have life and have it more abundantly. I'm not saying that you have to walk around and pretend to be happy all the time. I'm not saying that you have to walk around and pretend, sometimes, back in the day, my former fundy friends, right? We believed in the plastic fantastic, okay, right? You just smile all the time, and you'd go to church, and if something was wrong in your life, that meant you were doing something wrong, right? Because they're teaching, back in the old days, in my youth as they raised us up, if something bad happened to you, it's because you sinned and God's punishing you, right? Or if you're depressed or something like that, it's, you're not having enough faith or something. That's the way they taught us back then. And so everybody walked around with a fake, phony smile, and you say, well, how are you today? And they'd say, I'm just blessed. God's just blessed my socks off. Yes, sirree, right? Because if you said anything else, it's like, oh, what did you do wrong? You sinner, you. God gives life. We need to live it. We need to live it in an authentic manner. You know what? If you come into church and you've had the worst week of your life, please tell us that. Please tell us that. Don't put on a fake smile and I'm just blessed. No, you're not. You're having tell us you're having a lousy time. Because we can at least stop and pray for you. Or at least try to encourage you. Or like when my students get a bad grade, I give them a cookie. I'll give you a cookie. You come up to me and you tell me I've had the worst day of my life, I'll be like, where's the cookies? No, I got cookies here somewhere, right? But if you hide your wound, how can you heal your wound? I love what St. Francis said. St. Francis said that it was in my deepest wound that I encountered God, that I encountered Jesus within my deepest wound. And we have to start being authentic. That way, when Jesus comes to you and says, do you want to be healed? Notice the man at the pool didn't say, no, I'm just blessed so much. Instead, what did he say? Yeah, I need some help. I need somebody to carry me into the pool so I can get healed. And Jesus says, I'll just stand up and pick up your walk. That can't happen unless you're living authentically. Live your life because God is willing to give you more life and more abundantly. But you need to live authentically for it. How do you know an apple tree is an apple tree? It's got apples on it, right? If you walk up to an apple tree and it's got oranges on it, it's not an apple tree. How do you know an orange tree is an orange tree? It's got oranges on it. If you walk up and it's got cherries, it's a different tree. How do you know a fig tree is a fig tree? These are tough questions. I can tell you guys are just like totally bamboozled at this point. Let me try that one more time all together. How do you know a fig tree is a fig tree? It's got figs on it. Yeah, okay, you guys are trainable. That's good. I'm glad. Guys are just like my students, just, right? Seriously, because my students are like, there's a trick question coming, isn't there? This is a trick, isn't it? No, right? It's not a trick. You know an apple tree is an apple tree because it has apples. You know an orange tree is an orange tree because it's got oranges. You know a fig tree is a fig tree because it's got figs. How do you know Jesus is God? How do you know Jesus is God? Because he looks just like him. He looks just like his Father. He acts just like his Father. His works are the same works that his Father does. The fruit that he is producing in his life is the same exact fruit that God produced in the very beginning. That his work, God's work, is not done because he is still doing it right now. He is in the process of recreating this world and us to bring it back to what it once was before. Is that not a great thing? And this is what Jesus was trying to talk to them about. Just like you know an apple tree is an apple tree because it's got apples, you know that I am who I claim to be because you can see what I do. You can see what I do. I give life. I judge. I do the same things God does. So with that in mind, let's have the praise team come back. I'll close us in prayer.